Welcome to Who Makes the Patient's Medical Decisions. This video will be talking about making medical decisions both for children and also for adults. Let's start with children. So what are we talking about when we're talking about children? This includes any minor child under the age of 18. So of course, you're probably thinking about toddlers and preschoolers like this smearing paint all over, but this also includes 16, 17-year-olds, and even 17-year-olds who are not yet at their 18th birthday. And this is because children, although some are very mature and some are able to make decisions, cannot legally make the decision that's in their best interest. They're still working through and processing information, processing judgment and consequences. So, if the patient is a child, then the parent is the correct legal and ethical decision maker for the patient. The parent is the appropriate medical decision maker because we presume that the parent knows the child's medical history, they know what types of treatments will or will not be best or work for the child, and we also presume that parents have the child's best interest at stake. Now, of course, there are two major exceptions to this general rule. So the first exception, some states have these very narrow and discrete categories that permit minors to make only certain types of medical decisions without parental consent. So some states allow things like minors to make decisions to obtain STD treatment or contraception or abortion. But again, these are very narrow and discrete exceptions. They are not the rule, and not all states have the same law. So this would be something to be very cautious about. What's the second major exception here? Well, if a child has a life-threatening illness and there is an effective treatment that's available that would cure or save the child's life, but the parents declining that effective treatment, sometimes the physician can petition a court to intervene to try and give the child that treatment and save the child's life. The two biggest examples where this type of exception comes up would be if a child is dying but could be saved with a blood transfusion, or a child is dying of cancer but could be saved with chemotherapy. What about adults? So if you're an adult, anybody who's over 18, we presume that the adult has decision-making capacity. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this where adults are legally incompetent. So this would be, for an example, an adult who has a severe developmental disability, who cannot live on his own, who has a caretaker, and that person may have a family member or somebody else designated to make their medical decisions. But for most adults, we presume that adults make their own medical decisions because this respects their autonomy, their liberty, and their privacy to decide what types of treatments they either want or they don't want. Now, what if the adult loses decision-making capacity? So you can imagine there's a healthy 22-year-old person and he suddenly has a car crash and is in a coma or is in now a persistent vegetative state. So he was previously healthy but can no longer make his decisions. Well, the first thing is to check to see if this adult documented his wishes in an advance directive. So this would be a document that says, if I encounter this type of situation, so for example, if I am ever in a persistent vegetative state, this is the treatment I want or I don't want. Next, we would check to see if the adult appointed a medical decision maker. So this would be a surrogate. So for example, the adult might say, I want this person, and then designates that in a legal form to say, I want this person, for example, my live-in partner or my companion to serve as my decision maker. Next, if the patient did not designate a decision maker, then state law gives a list of people who would serve as that decision maker as by default. So lastly, what does state law say about this? So, if the patient doesn't have a document indicating who he wants, then the state law would generally go in this type of order. They would look, well, does this 22-year-old have a spouse? No. Okay. Well, does this 22-year-old have an adult child? Probably not. Does this 22-year-old have a parent? Probably. So, going down the list, that's how the clinicians would figure out who makes this adult's medical decision. So, it's the first person in the list who is reasonably willing and available to act. This concludes the lesson on who makes medical decisions.